Hi, so my name is Robert Toller Haining, and I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about API-based theming of mobile apps. I'm going to start off by giving a bit of background to provide context for the technical portion in a few minutes. I work on a product called PayPal Commerce. We work on a team at Braintree, which is a PayPal company, and we focus on contextual commerce, which is a fancy way of saying that we're building software for retailers to sell stuff in places other than their website. The thing I directly work on is our iOS SDK. Retailers like Shonimals ship a standalone mobile commerce app using our SDK and sell toys to their customers. Retailers like Intelligentsia, who had an existing app that provided content and utilities, used our SDK to embed commerce in that app and sell coffee to their customers. We have lots of retailers, and as you can imagine, each has its own unique branding. We offer various pulleys and levers to customize the shopping experience. A few of these options are the home screen style, colors, images, and fonts. To show off how we theme, I set up a simple code-driven app that sells a couple of products, a tote bag and a white t-shirt. And you can see that we have here are various home screen styles. For example, a grid of products, or a list of products, and either could filter to a particular parent category or just a list of categories. Let's take a look at colors. Let's take the buy button. It's a pretty critical part of any retailer's brand. Here's an example of ways a retailer might modify that color. You get a purple or blue, red, blue, green, pink. We'll stick with purple. As for images, you can imagine the logo is pretty central. I had some fun modifying code-driven logo to be the white Batman logo or full-color Batman logo. These resources are stored generically as keys and values, which makes it very extensible. You could imagine applying this to something like copy in the future. And all of it is configured in our control panel. But everything has a reasonable default. Every theme resource has a default, which means it's less work to get to a usable product. We're smart about it. For example, if the retailer has not uploaded the logo yet, we'll show a text label with the retailer's name. And our default launch screen points you to our control panel. All of this is saved from our control panel to our database and delivered by API to all of our clients. Our web client backend takes that and generates CSS. I won't go into too much detail there because I haven't worked on that product as much. So when you launch an app, we fetch all the data that you need from the API, everything you need to start selling to your customers, including the theme. The things we get from the API are the colors, the image URLs, and the home screen style. And I'm going to show you a couple quick examples of what this looks like coming down from the API. So you have the store resource type ID, which links to a type. In this case, it's an accent color. We have a name description and the default value, which in this case, since it's a color, it's a hex value. And then we just have a bool that it's not an image, and then our internal ID and the actual hex value that the retailer has chosen. For images, for instance, the header logo, it has all the same keys that you noticed before, but now we have no default value here, which is where we default to that text label with the retailer's name. And then the value is an image URL instead of the hex value. The home screen style looks a bit different. In this case, we're showing small products that belong to the home goods category. So how does all of this get consumed? There are a few relevant classes in the iOS SDK that I'm going to talk about. Our store resource model, a theme helper class, and the themed image view. The store resource model is very simple. All it does is translate JSON from the API to Objective-C so we can consume it. The theme helper class maintains a dictionary of key value pairs and saves the color value and image URLs locally in NS user defaults, which is just a simple lightweight key value store in iOS. It also handles converting hex to RGB that we can then build UI color objects of and use across the SDK. Our themed image view class subclass is UI image view, which is simply initialized with an image key and then handles downloading and caching that image and then rendering it. So what happens when the theme refreshes? We want the user interface to dynamically update whenever this happens. We use Apple's notification center for this, which lets us watch for updates and then refresh that UI. Here in our theme helper class, we've got a method save store resources, and at the end of it, we tell notification center to post a notification that theme did update. And then over in our buy button class, this is an example of how we're adding the observer to watch this particular notification, and then call this method did update theme, which then handles updating the buy button color. So what happens if you're offline? We've all been on a bad connection, whether on the subway or in the back of a grocery store. So what happens then? The first time an app is launched, we used an embedded configuration file. In iOS, this is a plist or property list, which is just a form of serialized data. Later, after we have downloaded the theme from the API, we'll cache that data using NSUser defaults, and we'll use that in subsequent sessions. But the API is always our source of truth and supplants anything we had before. So how do retailers configure all of this? In our control panel. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So here in our control panel, you can see a few of the color options and the logo. And if you went into the iOS tab up there, then you could see even more fine-grained options. And then to configure your home screen, you have those three primary options. And this is what it ends up looking like. We've got our grid of products, the code-driven logo up top. The navigation buttons are white on a black background. The banner color is blue. The buy button is purple to match the logo. So overall, the retailer modifies the theme in the control panel. The API stores that theme in the database. Customer opens the app via iOS SDK, fetches the theme from the API, then the SDK refreshes the user interface. So let's flip over to a little demo. We're going to update the buy button color in the panel and see the refreshed UI in the simulator. Let's see. So first, show you that this is our code-driven app in the simulator. We have those purple buttons. And then here's the control panel, and hopefully I'm still logged in. Yes. So we go into branding. Let's change the buy button color. Does anybody have any ideas for what they want it to look like? Green, yellow, purple? Green? Perfect. I like it. Cash. So we'll make it a nice bright green. Save that. And if we go back to our simulator, I'm just going to close the app and reopen it. And that'll refresh the UI, and then we have a green buy button. Let's talk about fonts. We handle fonts a little bit differently. We only look at the embedded configuration plist that ships with the app, not the API. And this is for a couple of reasons. First off, the custom fonts will need to be embedded in the app, so it makes sense to specify them in the shipped app. Also, if you're using a default iOS font, it might not exist on another kind of client, so we don't want to specify that across all of our clients. But again, we have reasonable defaults. We use the iOS system font, which on iOS 8 is Helvetica Neue, and then 9 and up is San Francisco. So back to our code-driven app. Since this is iOS 10, we have the default of San Francisco. But if we wanted to change that, we'll take a look at our local configuration file, and you can see each of the weights represented here that we use across the app: regular, thin, light, medium, and bold. And we've set it to Apple SD Gothic Neo. So when you refresh the app, it updates the UI accordingly, but maybe that looks too similar to what we had before, so let's try something a little bit more pronounced. So let's use Dido Bold. And you can see that it's quite different now. But what if we want something that Apple does not provide? It requires a bit more setup on the project side, and I'm not going to go into too much detail there. But I downloaded Nova Mono from Google Fonts under the Open Font license. And here you can see it applied directly across the UI. So what does this look like in practice? All of our fonts come from this helper class, where we specify the weight and the size. And in case there is a typo in the font name configuration, or if the custom file wasn't included properly, we'll simply fall back to that default font. And let's check out how the fonts work in action. We're going to set up a custom font and run the app to see it take effect. So we've still got our code-driven app up there. And I'm going to open up Xcode and take it from my super secret backup plist. So here I'm just adding the dictionary of fonts, specifying Nova Mono to our configuration file, and then I'll run that. And if all goes well, need some like hold music. Now you can see that the font is across the entire UI without having to change anything else in the app. You might ask yourself, why do I care? If you only have one mobile app or one website, this might not pertain to you. But you don't need to have tons of apps to make this worthwhile. Your API could simply be a JSON file hosted somewhere that then powers an iPhone app, an Android app, and maybe a website or two. And then any style changes automatically propagate across all of your clients. Thanks for your time. You can find me on these places on the internet. And if you want to read more about PayPal Commerce, you can find us at paypal.com/commerce. Thank you.
So we have this cool little cube for questions. Whoever was here last time got to watch us awkwardly throw it around. But if you got a question, raise your hand. We'll toss it your way. And I'll get you. One question I have for you.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen this get caught up in the App Store review process?
In terms of just the theming part?
Yeah. Does Apple care that you're changing apps on the fly?
No, they don't care about colors and fonts so much. If we were inserting different code or different functionality that they weren't expecting, then they might care about that. But just the sort of like look and feel side, we haven't had a problem with.
So how much versioning do you offer to the customers? Like, do they just change it and it's immediately in prod, or is it?
It's just immediately there. We haven't had any. A lot of what we do is prioritized based on what retailers ask for and want, and we haven't had a huge ask for that. Most of the time, people set it up and then ship their apps and their web clients and whatnot, and they're done with it. They don't go back and change things a lot after that. But it's there for them if they want to, and they don't need to do everything before they ship.
Okay. And then for the fonts, is it so they can choose from anything that's in Google Fonts, or can they upload their own?
You can use any font you want. You can ship any font you want to with an iOS app, and then to do that, you need to specify it in another plist that's just for iOS. And then for our SDK to consume it, you just edit that configuration file I was showing you.
Okay.
But it doesn't have to be Google fonts or Apple fonts or anything.
How does this interact with your A/B testing?
We don't do a lot of A/B testing, unfortunately. At some point I would love to, but we just haven't gotten there yet.
I would want to ask if, did you have any concerns about when you will give too many options for a user to edit graphic, to change colors, to change fonts? Because most of the time, when you allow the user to tinker on with graphic, it's going to end up horribly. Was that any of your concerns?
Yeah, so like we have at least like a reasonable set of defaults that look not terrible. Most retailers and businesses using our products have some kind of established brand, so it's not necessarily people coming and inventing something new as they go. We try to abstract out some of that, so we don't provide them with like a huge list of all of their options. You can choose like 2 colors as your primary colors, and most retailers probably have like a 2-color brand or something like that. And then you can go into the more fine-grained details if you want to. So there's probably like, I don't know, off the top of my head, there's like 10 or 20 options of different colors you can set, but we'll first show you like 2 or 3. And then if you want to go through and like make it more your brand, then you can do that.
The defaults that you showed us was only iOS. So are you also supporting Android?
We do not support Android right now. We have a iOS client and a web client.
Okay, so I'm assuming when it comes to the retailers, right, the one who want to consume your app, does it have to be only through the APIs only? Because a lot of retailers, I'm imagining, would not have the knowledge of using API.
Yeah, everything is abstracted out from them, so they don't need to necessarily have knowledge of our API. So for instance, I didn't get into this too much, but like our web client is a sort of focused buying experience that's just like one product that they point to that doesn't have any other Chrome or anything else around it, and you can embed it in blogs or other websites or what have you. So then they're just putting in an href link that then pops up in like an iframe or a pop-up or something like that. With the SDK, if you want to ship an app, you need a little bit more technical experience. You don't necessarily need to have knowledge of our API itself, though. But just to like go through the motions of dealing with like signing and provisioning and dealing with iTunes Connect and all that, you need to have some kind of technical expertise, but just not directly of our API or our theming API.
So do you also have the model for like adding the products and getting the payment?
Yeah, I didn't get into that too either, but essentially we have PayPal Commerce as a platform where we sync with various e-commerce platforms. So we'll pull in all of your products and your inventory and your photos and other metadata from like Magento or Demandware or Shopify or a couple others. And then we build tools on top of that which let the retailers' customers purchase products in other channels. So it's like the contextual commerce side of things where you could buy things within a blog or within an iPhone app or within an email or wherever.
One last thing, what is your revenue model like?
I probably can't get into that.
As much as possible.
I'm just a developer, yeah. I'll take revenue if you want to give me revenue.
Hey, Robert, did you roll your own JS to Objective-C layer, or did you use something like React Native?
For the JSON to Objective-C,
Yeah.
I'm using, what is it called? It's the, I'm gonna have to look it up. I use a library though. I think it's from GitHub. I think it's a Mantle. Yeah, we're using Mantle. Just took me a second. And it basically handles that like translation from JSON objects to Objective-C objects.
All right, last question.
Hey, unrelated to what you were saying, but can you talk a little bit about how your API handles authentication?
We use OAuth. So we have each client has an OAuth client ID and a secret, and when you first start a session, we start an authentication protocol with our API and get back a key that we then use for the rest of the session.
So this is a user section, not a retailer section?
Yeah, a user session. But for example, like our control panel is also an OAuth client of our API, so it also has its own OAuth creds.
I see. Cool. Thanks.
Anything else?
All right, Robert, thank you very much.
Thanks,
That was
all.
awesome.